Chair Lowry,
Present.
Vice Chair Drobish,
Here.
Member Friend,
Yes.
Member List,
Present.
Member Russell.
Here. Thank you. So, does anyone need anything taken off of the consent calendar tonight?
I'm just wanted to point out that I cannot vote on the adoption of the minutes of July 15. So if they're all included, then I'll have to recuse my vote. Just a notice to the chair.
Okay. So we'll take a voice vote on the adoption of items 3.1, 3.3, 3.4, and then we'll return and take a second voice vote on item 3.2.
Chair Lowry.
It'll be an outcry vote.
It's not.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
sorry.
I usually use two terms, and they're probably wrong, so just be prepared for that. A voice vote and a roll call vote. Roll call vote is,
I do the roll call vote.
yeah,
Got it.
gotcha. Okay, so all those in favor of adopting items 3.1, 3.3, and 3.4 as recorded, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All those in favor of adopting item 3.2, say aye. Aye. Okay. All right, well, that wraps that up then.
I apologize for my confusion. I was actually absent on July 1, not July 15th, and I misread, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, staff was wondering why you voted.
Let it be.
We now move to item 5, items of interest to the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. State law prohibits the commission from acting on items not listed on the agenda except by special action of the Planning Commission under specified circumstances. The chair reserves the right to limit the speaker's time to 3 minutes. The chair will recognize the speaker and ask that they state their name for the record. Personal attacks on individuals or comments which are slanderous or which may invade an individual's personal privacy will not be tolerated. And with that, does anybody have any items of interest to the public not on tonight's agenda? Okay, so I'll ask staff on item 6, do we have any communications?
We do not.
Thank you. That moves us to section 7, item 7.1. This is 2840 Mallard Lane, Western Slope Boys and Girls Club, conditional use permit 2014-01, site plan review 2014-01, environmental assessment 2014-03. This item was continued from the August 19th regular meeting. This is a request by property owner Mallard Investors Partnership for the Western Slope Boys and Girls Club for conditional use permit, site plan review, and environmental assessment mitigated negative declaration for the construction and use of a 14,567 square foot single-story metal building with a ridged steel frame, insulated exterior metal panels with stucco finish and a standing seam metal roof. Additional site improvements include an accessory outdoor recreation area, drainage and landscaping improvements. Commercial driveway encroachment to Mallard Lane, 49 on-site parking stalls, Mallard Lane street frontage improvements of 5-foot width and sidewalk, and road widening along the Green Valley Street frontage. The project is located on 2 adjoining parcels, APNs 325-120-13 and 325-120-81 at the southwest corner of the intersection of Green Valley Road and Mallard Lane. A mitigated negative declaration is proposed, declaring that the project will not have significant effect on the environment, incorporating mitigation measures identified in the initial study and subject to the appropriate conditions of approval. And at this point, I'll toss it to staff.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and those in the audience tonight. The commission is, again, to consider the construction and operation of a nonprofit charitable organization facility by the Western Slope Boys and Girls Club. It will be located at 2840 Mallard Lane. The new facility requires commission approval of a conditional use permit, which we are calling CUP 2014-01 for the use, and site plan review, or SPR 2014-01, and an environmental assessment for the construction of this facility, which is EA 2014-03. The site is comprised of 2 assessor parcels totaling 3.79 acres. The first is 1 acre in area and is zoned business professional. The second parcel, a 2.79 acre parcel, is designated high-density multifamily residential. The request is before the commission because under section 10.3.4 of the zoning ordinance, a nonprofit charitable organization facility is a use permitted in any zone with a CUP, or conditional use permit. The construction of the facility use, if granted by the commission tonight, requires site plan review under section 10.4.9 of the zoning ordinance. The commission is authorized under the zoning ordinance to consider both the conditional use permit and the site plan review requests. The new single-story facility would have approximately 14,500 square feet of floor area. The building exterior would consist of metal panels and stucco finish, as was described by the chair. A standing seam metal roof with photovoltaic panels would be mounted on the roof. An accessory outdoor recreation is provided, as well as drainage improvements for the site, a new sign plan for the facility, exterior lighting, as well as landscape improvements. The facility will have 49 on-site parking stalls, as well as a new Mallard Lane street frontage improvement consisting of a 5-foot wide sidewalk along the frontage, the site's frontage along Mallard Lane. Grading has been estimated for these improvements to involve nearly 11,000 cubic yards of cut as well as 12,000 cubic yards of fill. 13 trees would be removed during the grading activities. And due to this grading of cut and fill slopes, rockery walls of variable heights would shore up those slope environments. Grading and construction activities are expected to take 9 months. The Boys and Girls Club will operate a programming for their clientele, which consists of character development, educational and career development programming, health and life skills, arts and recreation, as well as sports and fitness. The facility would be open between 2 p.m. to a little after 6 p.m. Monday through Friday during the school year, with early opening on school release days as well as minimum days during the school year. During the summer, the facility would be open 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. During the school year, most children will arrive by bus, where drop-offs and unloading will occur where indicated on the site plan. The applicant has suggested in their application materials that 6 buses will arrive at staggered times to drop off these children who will utilize the facility. Other users will arrive by bicycle or by walking or be dropped off by parents. During the summer, children will be dropped off only by either arrive by bicycle, by walking, or be dropped off by parents. Proposed signage for the site include a halo illuminated wall logo along the facility's south elevation, as well as a ground sign with reader board and 1 internally illuminated incidental sign located near the entrance walkway. Total sign area is approximately 90 square feet. A preliminary landscape plan was prepared for the site with a request that a final plan be approved during construction plan submittal. A comprehensive exterior lighting plan is proposed, and this plan includes pole-mounted parking and driveway lighting, bollard lighting, as well as under canopy and wall sconces. And those elevations and details were part of your packet for you to review and consider tonight. Independent of the Boys and Girls Club facility submittal, the city has received a parcel merger application from the property owner that would merge the two parcels that comprise the public-private project site. A parcel merger is necessary to eliminate a potential setback violation if the facility was built without the merger of the two lots together. This application is expected to be approved by staff, and certification and recordation of the merger prior to the issuance of a permit for facility building construction. The Commission, when considering a conditional use permit, must make findings to support its approval or disapproval. To approve a conditional use permit, the Commission must make a finding that the use is deemed essential or desirable to the public convenience or welfare, is in harmony with the elements and objectives of the general plan, and that the use will not be detrimental to surrounding properties. In reviewing a site plan review, the Commission must also consider criteria within Section 1049G of the zoning ordinance. This is the site plan review section. Page 4 of staff's report summarizes these criteria for the Commission, and there are three main criteria categories: the relationship of buildings to a site, the relationship of buildings and site to the surrounding area, and building design. Staff found during its review of the project as a whole that the project would meet required zoning ordinance setback, building height, exterior lighting, development standards. Also, parking appears adequate to serve the facility and its needs. The screening of ground equipment, trash receptacle, propane tank, etc. meets the site plan review criteria. Proposed signs are well related geographically to one another, are compatible with signage in the project vicinity, and sign area proposed is less than the maximum that would be allowed under the city's sign regulations. Staff has conditioned the project to require the submittal of a final landscaping and irrigation plan to come back before the Commission for their review and approval. Additionally, staff conditions involve the construction of a new 24-foot wide driveway encroachment to Mallard Lane to serve the facility, the widening of the northerly half of Green Valley Road along the project site's Green Valley Road frontage to provide a 12-foot travel lane and 8-foot shoulder bike lane, as well as a future left turn pocket on Green Valley Road at Mallard Lane, and roadside drainage meeting El Dorado County standards. The installation of a disabled access curb ramps at the site's Mallard Lane, Green Valley Road curb return, replacement of the existing substandard ramp across Mallard Lane at the northeast corner to meet current standards, and new striping on Mallard Lane to provide for a crosswalk across the road at this location. Site improvements would harmonize the site and the surrounding neighborhood by introducing positive architectural quality that provides visual interest and landscaping that are compatible with adjoining business professional uses. The project, therefore, as conditioned, is consistent with the site plan review criteria and also Goal H in Policy 1 of Goal H of the community design element, which states the promotion of and the development of institutional uses that meet high design standards that emphasize appropriate and aesthetic architectural, landscape, and streetscape treatment. Environmental review of this request was conducted by staff. Staff concluded upon completion of the initial study that the appropriate environmental document for the project was a mitigated negative declaration, in that the potential significant impacts on the environment from the project would be eliminated, reduced, or minimized to a less than significant level with the proposed mitigation measures and monitoring proposed, as well as standard development project conditions that staff has developed. Staff therefore concludes that the mitigated negative declaration would be the appropriate document, and Exhibit C of your staff report is the draft document, as well as a mitigation monitoring plan prepared as well. During public noticing for the request, the city did receive one comment. That comment is provided in your staff report. In conclusion, the project would further the Boys and Girls Club organization's continued investment into the Placerville community by providing a structured environment for participating children, and staff enthusiastically supports the request. Staff's recommendation tonight is that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing to consider the input from the public as well as the applicant, make findings on pages 7 and 8 of staff's report in support of conditional use permit 2014-01, make the findings on page 8 of staff's report in support of site plan review 2014-01, receive, adopt, and file the mitigated negative declaration for the request, and conditionally approve CUP 2014-01 and site plan review 2014-01 for the Western Slope Boys and Girls Club, subject to the mitigation measures that begin on page 8 that continue to page 11, as well as the conditions of approval 1 through 52 beginning on page 11. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Painter. Okay, so the way I suggest we proceed here is I'd like to ask the applicant to come forward, make his or her presentation, then take public input, and after the public input has been heard, I'd like to give the applicant a final opportunity to address any concerns or questions that were raised during the public input portion. Is there concurrence on that process? Is that acceptable?
From staff's perspective, absolutely.
Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed that way, and I'll ask the project applicant to come forward to the applicant or applicants to come forward and state your name and tell us about your project.
Okay. My name is Sean McCartney, and I'm the director of the Boys and Girls Club. Thank you for having us tonight, staff and members of the commission. So what we're doing is about 20 years in the making. You know, when Boys and Girls Club started up here in Placerville, it started small. They were just doing dances, and then we grew and we grew, and we took over the Armory building and have been doing our darndest at the Armory. But just like things happen, we've kind of outgrown the Armory. And this new building is really not just a project for us and our ability to serve our kids and serve them better, but it's really going to be a community barn raising, so to speak. The land was donated. We are in the midst of a very aggressive capital campaign to ensure that we meet the needs that the building are going to have for us as it relates to financials. Bottom line, I think what's going to happen here is a legacy is going to be built for the kids that use it today, that use it next year when we're in the new building, and 10 years from now, and 20 years from now. And it's just it's an exciting thing to be able to tell these kids that come through my doors right now. We have about 150, and when we have this new building, we'll have about 250. We're building this for you, and we're building this because we really believe in the opportunities that you're gonna have, and we're trying to give you hope. And you know, we have all types of kids that come to our Boys and Girls Club, but when they walk through our doors, one thing that they know is that we're there for them, and that we're going to be there for them. And so this is a further example of us really trying to ensure that the club is here and the club is strong for years to come. So what I want to do now is introduce our architect for the building, Mr. Charlie Downs. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, good evening. My name is Charlie Downs with Architectural Nexus. I'd like to first introduce some board members that are here this evening that are here to show their support for the application. So if you'd please stand. Thank you. And without further ado, I'd like to jump to a couple of the conclusions or the recommendations in the staff report or the conditions of approval. Just for the commission's information, item number 11 under the engineering division on page 12 relative to traffic mitigation fees, we do intend to, recognizing that the Planning Commission doesn't have the power to waive those fees, but we do intend to appeal that condition to the City Council. We do not feel that we're a growth-inducing project. We are a recipient of growth, like an educational facility is. The reason that the Western Slope Boys and Girls Club exists is because we are serving the population that's already here on the Western Slope. So Just for the record, I wanted to make sure that the commission understood that. The other piece that we're contesting is item number 28, and that's the degree of widening of Mallard Lane. One of the conditions is, for instance, a left-hand turn pocket for eastbound Green Valley Road people. So coming up from Weber Creek, a left-hand turn lane for those individuals heading eastbound that would be turning left onto Mallard Lane. We don't feel that that's appropriate level of improvement given the traffic that we're going to experience. We would like to take the time and work with the city engineer and have our civil engineer and our traffic engineer meet with the city to come up with what we think is an appropriate level of improvement. The reason for that is simply a cost and the level of development that we think is appropriate. Just to give you an idea, I had our civil engineer run some cost estimates of the degree of improvement, further site development improvement that would be necessary to accommodate that wide width. And we're looking at almost $45,000 worth of retaining walls, one of which is going to be 10 feet tall. So running not the entire length, but a portion of the frontage along Green Valley Road. There's some other work associated with all that improvement. Bottom line, it's going to potentially cost the Boys and Girls Club $144,000 just in construction costs. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have relative to the project. If not, I'll sit down and we'll let the public have at it. Yes.
I have a question for the chairman, actually. It wasn't clear to me, George, in your form here, if the commission was going to have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicants, or if you were going to go straight to public hearing.
Well,
Because I have questions.
Either way is fine. I suspect that after we've taken public input, we may find that we have further questions, but that's not to say that we can't. You know, if you
No,
have a
that's
question
fine.
right now.
If we go public, ask the members of the public to speak, and then keep the public hearing open, and then we can ask questions of the applicant then at that point.
That works for me.
All right, fine, thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't see anybody with questions, Charlie, so I guess we'll proceed with the rest of the public input. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
We'll be calling you back.
Okay.
So would anyone like to speak to the project pro or con at this time? Please come forward and identify yourself, and we'll be happy to hear your input. Okay. So are you comfortable, Charlie? Can you come back to the podium now?
Be happy to.
Okay. I think Commissioner Friend has one question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple. And Charlie, it's great to see you on this project, and I think that folks have done well to select Charlie for this. Actually, the majority of my questions deal with the architectural aspects of the project, but I want to go back to the widening of Mallard Lane and the turn pocket that you raised. And if you're not in a position, you may or may not be in a position to answer this, and so the first gentleman whose name I didn't write down may need to answer this. But by and large, how do the children, the majority of children, get to and from the facility? Because they aren't driving themselves, I presume. I could be wrong, but
They're bused from the different school districts around the city.
okay, so we have large numbers, relatively large numbers of children coming in aggregate as opposed to individual single vehicles.
That's an accurate statement.
So that, to me, would tend to speak against the necessity for the road improvements on Mallard Lane, and why saddle the nonprofit necessarily with that. If it was individual vehicle trips coming to the facility, that might be a different situation, but it sounds like if they're coming from buses and whatnot, then perhaps the necessity is not as great. So then I'd like to talk a little bit about visual interest. I don't believe this rendition here was in our original packet from 2 weeks ago. And I really appreciate this rendition here to my right, your left, I think. And I'm assuming that this rendition here is the south elevation. This one on the top is the south elevation.
That's correct.
It wasn't labeled. And I don't understand, I couldn't quite place this bottom entry perspective. Which elevation is that now?
That'd be the elevation that faces east.
East elevation.
So that's kind of what you would see from the parking lot.
Okay, all right. So these renditions here provide a whole lot of visual interest that I don't really get in these flat drawings on this side. And my main concern with this was what I perceived as kind of a lack of visual interest, particularly on the north elevation, because that is the elevation coming up from Mallard Lane. And I'd like to see this type of rendition for all of the elevations, number one. Number two, I noticed that on this top elevation here, the window structure is different on this elevation than what's shown here. And I'm going to stand up just to show you. I believe that this window right here is supposed to be this one right here, because these two match up with this corner. So this is substantially different in my view than what this is right here. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and the explanation is the renderings that we brought this evening were part of some deliverables that we provided the club for their capital campaign.
Sure.
And they were the only three-dimensional drawings we had of the facility. The elevations are the most accurate.
Okay.
Now, addressing the north elevation, keep in mind that there's a pretty steep bank from the adjacent property to the north down to the driveway that runs out to the west to the parking that's in the rear that serves also as a bus turnaround. So, yeah, the north elevation is probably the one that lacks the luster, but it's fairly concealed, and so it's it's just straightforward. Architecturally, there's actually, with the massing of the buildings, there's actually quite a bit going on with the two different positions of the gabled end. The gabled end facing the parking, and then the gabled end of the gym itself facing Green Valley Road. So there's going to be quite a bit of visual interest that those flat elevations just really don't depict.
I'm not aware of any project you've done that doesn't have visual interest, frankly. But is there a possibility, you have to come back with a final landscape and irrigation to commission anyway. Is it possible at the same time to bring back some additional renditions of the other elevations that we don't have tonight?
Well, we certainly could. We're, of course, trying to keep the amount of work down to
Sure.
To a minimum. What we were hoping with the landscape improvements, there was a conceptual plan that was provided to staff, and we were hoping that the staff could further review the drawings, the construction documents once they're produced. Sean had mentioned that this whole effort is kind of a community barn raising of sorts. We're trying to balance the requirements of the projects against what we're able to get from the community. So we're hoping that once we understand what kind of donations on the landscape side we're going to have, then we can finish up our drawing that can be approved by city staff.
Okay. Thank you. No additional questions.
In looking at the site plan, you call for 48 spaces, parking spaces, and a number of those are overlaid on the outdoor basketball courts. Will there be enough parking when those basketball courts are in use and you're not able to drive through there? How many cars are involved with coming and going at this point? Maybe Sean can answer that.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. List, what the intention was that the visitors and maybe a portion of the staff would park out in front in the front parking by Mallard Lane, and then there'd be a portion of them parking in the rear. But Sean can speak a little bit more to the specifics of staff versus visitor parking.
So parents come starting around 4 o'clock, and it's a staggered pickup for the rest of the afternoon, basically until we close around 6. And the majority of the parking, the way that they've designed it, that's going to house pretty much all of the parent pickups when the parents are coming to get their children. We will utilize the other parking for staff. You know, we don't have, right now I have 11 staff working for me at Placerville, so it's not going to be a tremendous impact as it relates to parking. When we do utilize, or if we do need to use the outside basketball courts, then obviously that would change. But as of right now, the existing site that we have designed, I think, is more than capable of handling our parking needs that we currently have.
So you're using 10 or 11 spots for staff, and I forgot the number of parking places out in front.
Probably need about 7 spots for staff because a couple staff drive together. And then I think the number of spots in front, Charlie, I think it's over 20 that are in front. And so that's more than enough for what we have. If you were to go by the Armory now, we have about 7 spots in front. And so we're actually thrilled with the amount of parking and think that it'll be more than capable to handle.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just make a comment about the landscaping. When I first saw the conceptual plan, I thought, wow, this looks great. There's just all kinds of tree massing, and it looks really good, until I started looking at it a little closer, and there aren't any native trees at all. There's no indication of what shrubbery might be used, and if any of that is native. I just want to read it, that you're going to have to, bring forth a complete landscape plan showing species and the percentage of native materials, the sizes, the quantities, the irrigation plan, and the whole thing, just so you know that,
Understood.
I have a question. Would the facility have events like potentially a concert where there would be a large amount of parking needed at one time, overflowing onto Mallard and other neighborhoods?
As of right now, our focus is simply on the afternoon programming that we're doing, and then also the summer programming. In the event that we do some type of special event, I believe that what we would look to do is maybe provide some shuttle busing from the Rayleigh's parking lot or something to that effect. Really, we're not going to look into utilizing Mallard or anything like that in terms of causing any traffic congestion.
Do you have a good relationship with the property owner to the north?
We do. We've spoke to Dr. Rahimi, and he's excited about the process, and so we've had those discussions already. And so there is the opportunity for overflow during his non-office hours.
Thank you.
Okay, I would, on the topic of the vegetation, well, yeah, I guess I can ask this question now. On the topic of the vegetation and the negotiations over the left turn pocket, I don't see, the vegetation is certainly within our purview, and a complete vegetation plan is less indicated. I'm less sure about this, the Planning Commission adjudicating this left turn parking or left turn pocket. I mean, is that really an issue for the city engineer to discuss with the applicant and resolve? Pierre?
This development,
Thanks.
whether it be a nonprofit or a for-profit business, is subject to on-site improvements. And those on-site improvements are typically predicated upon the city's ultimate road cross-section, or prism, if you will. So basically the discretion may come in where we may be imposing off-site improvements. So off-site improvements then are more predicated on the impacts associated with the development, where the on-site improvements are not. They're just, because this is a vacant piece of property, the person or the entity that would come in and develop a piece of property that is vacant would then have to bring or actually develop then the on-site improvements, and be that additional right-of-way or sidewalk, curb and gutter, additional road width, etc. Those are then to be performed as a result of the development of the property. And so it would be staff's opinion that you have little or no discretion in changing what's being required by the city in terms of on-site improvements.
Thank you. That's what I hoped you would say.
And looking at the zoning maps, looks like the property line runs right down Green Valley. Is that correct? There's no dedicated,
I don't understand your question. The property line?
there is no dedicated easement on the Green Valley side that the city owns for Green Valley Road?
This parcel was subdivided many years ago, and as a result of that parcel map, the city required that subdivider to enter into a street frontage improvement agreement, which would involve, I don't have that agreement in front of me, but I believe it would have required the property owner at the city's interest and desire to have them installed to widen the road as necessary, include street frontage improvement agreement with improvements that include typically curb, gutter, and sidewalk. That being said, we would not have imposed that on vacant pieces of land until such time as it would make sense for us to call in the agreement. In this case, because a development project is proposed, the city would have its authority under the code to call that in. We have not chosen to do that with basically swapping out the requirement for street frontage improvement agreement or improvements on that parcel to swap out those improvements with a widening of the overall width of the project site along Green Valley Road. It's a long-winded answer. I apologize, but
So if there are existing conditions on the property, would tonight's action override them or include them? The street, the sidewalk agreement?
They're mentioned in the engineer's recommended conditions. In fact, the text talks about the requirement for the widening of the street, and the purpose of that widening, and there's a separate paragraph that describes the street frontage improvement agreement and the city's desire to rescind that once the widening of the street occurs.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can along this point, because I do want to push a little bit back on staff. What's the data then that's driving the necessity to put in the left turn pocket? I mean, I'm presuming that there is a nexus between the traffic and activity generated by the pocket and then the impact to Mallard Lane that would suggest the requirement for the left turn pockets. What is that nexus?
With the absence of the engineer here to explain that nexus, I'm not sure I adequately can, but the city has an interest in having, because that particular road segment and the intersection at a future condition. Again, we're not asking that they stripe this turn pocket at this time, but provide the area for it for the future when the city needs to do it. As this body is aware, there are parcels on Mallard Lane further to the north, which are vacant, which are zoned high-density residential. There's a potential that those properties will develop, and at such time, additional traffic will be on Mallard Lane. There's a possibility and a likelihood that a certain percentage of that traffic will make a right turn and head towards the west, down crossing Weber Creek and up towards into El Dorado, into unincorporated El Dorado County. I believe the city engineer is looking out for not only this particular use and the generated traffic, but also looking out for future expansion of that roadway to accommodate future traffic as well.
I don't think that's unreasonable, but it does seem that we are imposing the burden of providing for that future use on this particular project, and I'm not thinking that this particular project is one that's really going to be generating the use. It's really going to be coming from Mallard is clearly a major arterial, and that's been identified. But it doesn't seem correct to me to be imposing this on this particular project. Charitable, non-charitable, profit, non-profit, notwithstanding, understood. But I don't see the nexus there. I understand the applicant is going to appeal that condition to council, and that it makes sense to me to do that. With the absence of the city engineer being able to provide a clear nexus to the project, I wouldn't be uncomfortable at all with striking that condition.
I think what staff is requiring of the applicant is the ultimate width. We need to make sure that the city has the ultimate width necessary to do the improvements when they're required. We're not going to come in, 5-10 years from now and then have to acquire the property from the property owner. As properties develop along any road segment, the city then is obligated to try and acquire the ultimate width of the road.
Okay.
Staff did meet with the applicants early on, and we proposed maybe requiring a traffic study. The applicant neglected not to do such a traffic study, and so we need to be cautious that we do have a negative declaration lacking such a study, which the applicant could have provided, which then could have better substantiated the improvements necessary in the pre-post construction of the project and cumulative impacts with development of other properties.
Okay. So, but then Charlie referred to a fairly substantial retaining wall that's got to be constructed as a result of providing for the width then, which is then a significant cost that they otherwise wouldn't have to incur. So how do we mitigate that component? Did I understand that correctly?
When you say mitigate, do you mean mitigate an environmental impact of the wall or mitigate the cost of
Mitigate
the wall
the cost,
on the developer?
I guess. Yeah, I guess mitigate the cost.
Yeah, staff really is not in the position of trying to mitigate the cost per se. So I think the only option that we would have would be appealing this to the city council. The city council, of course, has much more discretion as far as the city codes than this body does.
Yeah.
And so what we had advised the applicant is that we could look at maybe attempting to reduce the required shoulder/bike width by maybe in half. But I think that's something that has to occur at a later stage in this process.
Okay, thank you.
So as I understand it, the city's just asking for the territory for future wider roads. They're not going to be forced to build them right now, correct?
That's correct.
And who would, I believe their fair share of the traffic impact mitigation funds would go to the city to be held and be used at a future time when a left turn is required.
That's
Let me clarify the statement made. If you read the condition by the city engineer,
Access to build.
the applicant shall reconstruct and widen from the intersection. It's the striping of the left turn pocket, which could come at a future date. We will have the width if that widening is built and installed. I needed
Well,
to
how about they
clarify.
give you the land and then the city does the building? I mean, there's a way to mitigate cost. I guess I don't understand. I'm sorry, Commissioner, if I spoke over you, but I guess I don't understand why we're asking them to make the road improvement. I saw Charlie getting up. I don't know if he's got something to add to this, but that's the part I guess I don't understand is why we're asking this particular applicant to make this road improvement, particularly when it's a downstream issue of the parcels to the north, really that I think will cause the issue and not really what the activity generated by this particular project.
So I think what the commission is being asked to approve tonight is a conditional use permit to move forward and the negative declaration so that the project can move forward and the project sponsors have standing, if you will, to engage with the city engineer and to engage with city council to ask for any relief that they think is appropriate. And so we're discussing things that are possibly outside the purview of the Planning Commission. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct, and I do want to clarify again that this is frontage improvements to the property. Property is currently vacant. It's going to be developed, and then regardless of what facility is being built there, the development of that property, then the developer, the project proponents are obligated to build the frontage improvements.
Right.
Just the frontage.
I mean, as a kid who went through a boys' club, they were called boys' clubs back then. You know, I could have any number of personal and sentimental views on reducing the expenses to the developer. Could have any number of views. Those are my personal views. As a planning commissioner, I think that I'm silent on that topic. And the focus, I'd like to ask, is it appropriate to concentrate our focus on making the decision about supporting the negative declaration and approving the conditional use permit? Is that the topic in front of the commission?
Yeah, that's staff's request for your consideration tonight.
And I would simply request, I saw Charlie get up, I'd simply like to hear what he has to say on this, and then I won't ask any additional questions, Mr. Chairman.
Well, just to clarify, and I think it was stated, but just to repeat it, that, yeah, we wouldn't have any heartburn with offering the property for dedication. The issue is us having to improve it, and particularly in light of the extensive site work that would be required because of the topography, given the width.
So this body could approve it as written. If it's going to go on appeal to city council, they could clarify the language in 28, condition 28, to clarify if that is reconstructed now, in the future, or what have you, correct?
The only time that off-site improvements are deferred is through is the frontage improvement agreement. And that's essentially what that instrument does. And so when this property was subdivided, these agreements were recorded against the property. So any future purchaser, whoever it may be, understands that those improvements would have to be made in accordance with city standards. So it's not a new, unforeseen financial burden on somebody that wants to develop the
No, it's
property.
very standard practice. The engineers constantly analyzing traffic, future traffic impact, looking for flows and what's going to happen. I have a question on other developments, especially like a subdivision. I've seen it before where a condition is an upgrading of the water line, the sewer line, for future capacity past that development, and any future development past that line that uses those lines pays that original developer back, correct? Their fair share.
Yeah, it's called a reimbursement district
Can
or
any kind of
benefit district.
reimbursement agreement be put together for this extra left turn lane from Green Valley onto Mallard? If this project isn't creating that much traffic to require the left, but the future high density around the corner is, shouldn't the future high density have to pay for that, at least pay them back?
They're not being required to put in the turn lane. They're being required to provide for the ultimate road width and then do the frontage improvements adjoining the property, adjoining the development, the frontage improvements, curb, gutter, sidewalk.
And then is there a proposed left turn lane on Mallard into the project? I didn't see one.
No.
I just had just wondering where the bus traffic was coming from. Is it coming from Placerville Drive, Green Valley into the project? And I heard staggered bus deliveries, but I'm worried about buses queuing up on Mallard trying to turn in and creating blocking Mallard North.
Yeah, I don't believe the applicant has stated where these buses are coming from, but it's assumed that they're local schools, and there are schools, of course, that are outside the city's jurisdiction that may service this particular facility. So
That's
it's
another-
possible that.
Another question, would county buses be coming from Green Valley eastbound and then turning north onto Mallard?
That might be a question for
Sean,
Mr.
would you
McCartney.
like to speak to that?
So we had all of the transportation coordinators come to the site because obviously we wanted to get ahead of this and make sure that we were on the same page. And what we discussed initially was maybe widening and doing a turnout, so to speak, and that didn't work. And so what we've done is we're going to bring all of the buses are going to be routed and come from north on Mallard down, and then come and do the loop and then come out. And so, and they won't be parking on the road, and they'll all be doing their drops on our property, safe for the kids, safe for traffic, safe for families.
Staff would like to point out for clarification that it is our understanding, unless the applicant has something else to say on the matter, that the buses would deliver the kids to the facility only, but pickup is all done individually by parents or friends.
That's true.
One point I'd like to make, if I may, I would say that 98% of the traffic is going to be coming from the east, heading west, and then turning right onto Mallard Lane. We just do not see traffic coming up from Weber Creek.
I just have some general questions on the project itself. I was just kind of, how tall is the retaining wall in the outside basketball court area? I kind of have this, I see the basketball going over the fence, off the retaining wall, and a kid wanting to go after it and getting hurt, because it says up to a 10-foot retaining wall.
I don't have the specific height with me. I'd have to look at the engineer's drawings, but we are constructing a chain link fence at the top of the retaining wall.
A 4-foot fence, right?
No, it's going to be taller. It's going to be 6-foot fence.
Because I could envision a taller net. I know the city has a 6-foot fence limit?
No, you can build a fence of any height in the city. It's over 6 feet that requires engineering.
Okay, and that's just at the counter?
Well, in this particular case, since it is a landscape improvement, that improvement should be approved by this body, Planning Commission.
I'd like to give them the permission, whether they do it or not, to install netting in that area. They might not need it, but right now is the time to give them that right. And then what color, this goes to the colors, are you sticking with the colors on the elevations right here for stucco and metal?
Yes, and unfortunately, computers. I don't have the color chips with me. I apologize for that. But basically, colors you see are what the computer can produce. But it's kind of a terracotta and kind of a pewter color for that you see there.
Is that day glow green going to be there?
That's so the idea of this whole facility is the rigid frame on the inside of the structure is all going to be exposed. It's going to be a very exciting and vibrant kind of a space with those really sharp colors. The idea is just to generate a lot of excitement and energy, the kind of energy that kids have. So that's the concept.
And you would probably, I have some questions you could probably answer. The monument sign, it will not be LED or neon or electronic scrolling, correct?
Well, we have the gentleman who's donating the sign right here that can probably talk to that.
Good evening. My name's David Brazelton, Western Sign Company. Correction, the sign is LED, backlit. Halo, I can't see it from here, but all the lettering that you see there is backlit and edge lit, where it looks like a halo at night. The reader board is all opaque except for the letters, not like your general reader board where the whole panel's lit up at night. We made that very simple to where just the lettering. We feel that reader board's very important. We do a number of different activities and different programs through the year where a reader board's very important. The sign on the south side of the building is face lit in the traditional Boys and Girls Club national blue, and it's also edge lit. I'm sorry, correction, not face lit, edge lit and halo lit. It will not be lit through the face, so it'll also have an edge halo on the whole thing. Everything is LED, low voltage. Maybe the whole sign program will probably pull under 10 amps, which is nothing.
Nice. It's very tasteful. I like the sign package.
Thank you.
And then just to clarify with staff, the non-opaque background is okay per sign ordinance?
No, it's opaque.
Yeah, so
It
the
is
reader
opaque.
board, the reader board.
The reader board is opaque.
Okay.
As you see up there, just the lettering is shown up in white. We could do another other than a black outline during the day, you know, where the panel is, and just let the letters be white. We could do any color you want, but the black opaques out the lighting except for the lettering.
No, I like it. It's tasteful.
Thank you.
A question for staff on the rezone of this property. That's coming up in the future, right?
The rezone of this property?
The
No, there'll be no
combining.
rezone of this property.
Isn't there a combining of two parcels?
That's a merger,
Okay. But
merger
is
application.
one commercial and one residential?
That's correct.
Was that residential one of the potential R5 zone properties
Not on the fifth cycle housing element. It was not.
on the fourth cycle?
Fourth cycle it was, but
Okay,
that's
so-
not the active.
It's not going to
Current,
impact the
okay.
city's need to rezone another parcel R5 with this one coming
No, I
off?
believe the environmental document addresses that
Okay.
that concern adequately.
And then how concerned is staff about a potentially incomplete MND with no traffic analysis?
Staff felt comfortable that the
Yeah.
Requirements being imposed in the development would mitigate.
As conditioned. sure.
In
As
with the
conditioned.
conditions, it then,
That's
okay.
correct.
Is, back to it doesn't matter. That's good for now.
Do the commissioners have any other questions for staff?
Just a technical question, Mr. Chairman. I think the public hearing is still technically open, hasn't been closed.
Nope, I never remember to close it until you tell me to.
That's why I'm here.
So, the public hearing is closed. That said, are there the commission have any other questions of staff before we call the question?
I have a sequel questions on sheet C3 mentioning removing a 21-inch oak towards the north of the property. Is that absolutely necessary? Looking at the grading, can't a retaining well be put around that tree to, does that tree have to be cut down? That thing is probably well over 200 years old.
Based on the applicant's submittal, that tree would not survive based on the improvements proposed.
To the grading outside,
Yeah.
close to the drip line. Does staff feel it's worth trying to keep it and see what happens?
I think the applicant will come back before you as illustrated by the preliminary or conceptual landscape plan by providing probably 4 or 5-fold, maybe 10-fold of trees and shrubs that would adequately mitigate the removal of that tree, although of course they're not going to be planted at the same height or breadth or age, but I think from that perspective, I think we have an adequate amount, and I foresee a landscape plan that will come back before you that will address and illustrate that they've thought about shading and providing canopy on that site.
Would the landscape plan come back before a grading permit is issued?
The city would like that particular request to come back before you prior to the issuance of a building permit to allow them to begin construction or at least prep the site for the winter, perhaps.
So if this,
If the commission wishes to push that upward or up closer to prior to the issuance of the grading permit, that I would think that staff would agree that is under your purview. You could mandate that or require that as a condition.
I'd like to see it come back before a grading permit. I don't know when the applicant would like to turn soil, but I don't want to delay their project, but I would like to combine their landscape plan with what they plan on taking out at the site. I don't know how fellow commissioners feel about bumping it up to pre-grading permit than building permit.
I suggest that someone form that in a motion, and then we take a roll call vote on the requirement. But we'll take a roll call vote if your motion on your motion.
Okay, and then staff on landscape page L1, there's under the notes, the last sentence says, the landscape, I forget where it is now, landscape attorney reserves the right to replace any plant materials per the discretion. That doesn't really work that way, right? Whatever the landscape plan calls out, that's what gets built.
Are you referring to a document prepared by the applicant?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Cut
those
sheet
are their words and not the city's words. If
But-
you're asking us if we would agree with that,
do you
I
agree
don't
with
think
that?
we generally agree with that, no.
No.
The landscape plan should be a reflection of your approval. The city would have some
Discretion.
discretion if, yes,
s-
if
similar
quantity
species.
or, yeah, correct. yeah.
Okay, so that's another reason for them to choose natives because they're, I imagine.
Right, we had a project a few years back, and there are a couple members who might remember it, where they received site plan review approval. They went ahead and installed landscaping, and it was completely contrary to what was approved. And I brought them back before the commission, and they had to make changes or substantiate for what they did. But I won't name names, but that does happen, and we want to avoid that if we can.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about, you mentioned something about it. If we could save that oak tree, put it in a well, but oak trees are so sensitive, and if you pile up dirt around them outside the well, 2 or 3 or 4 feet, the tree would die. It would suffocate the roots, and it just wouldn't live.
I just have one comment. In a lot of the materials that I've seen over the last few months that I've been on the commission, we've talked about this thing of what is Placerville, and looking at the historical perspective of our town. And I was sitting here thinking about Green Valley coming up that hill, and the future of a sidewalk going to nowhere along this piece of property and stopping at that point. And in my perspective, I kind of feel like we're trying to put a flatlands design in the foothills, and that kind of bothers me. I don't know if I'd like to see the idea of not having sidewalks along that side if they're not going to be something that's going to be used. And I'm thinking of down the hill and how far someone would have to walk along the road before finally getting onto the sidewalk area. And just an observation, and I think it's wasted concrete and wasted effort.
Yeah, if staff can comment on that. I understand your comment. I just want, for clarification, point out that the city is not requiring sidewalks on Green Valley Road. It stops at the corner there at Mallard and Green Valley. Staff agrees. You're not going to see a lot of pedestrian traffic beyond that point. But again, I just want to point out, you know, in regards to this or other future projects, we are a city, and so the city does have a higher level of standards for circulation, both vehicular, pedestrian, bicycles, than you would typically see in a county setting. But
Absolutely,
again, I want
understand
to point out there is no sidewalk proposed. We would agree with that.
It is possible that when development occurs on the relatively vacant or, well, they're mostly vacant properties on the south side of the road. Once those properties develop, if at all, then the city will require street frontage improvements. And due to the commercial nature of that zone currently, that parcel would be required to build a sidewalk on that side of the street up to the intersection. And with the condition we have with you know, providing that disabled curb cut to accommodate that future crosswalk, then the city is in a good perspective to have that installation done by that future developer for that south side of the street.
But on the south side, you also would have on-street parking. Is that correct?
Not necessarily true.
Sidewalk, no on-street parking, okay?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to speak in support of what Commissioner List is saying in terms of his concept, though, and what is Placerville. And after this item, we're going to be hearing another item where it actually talks about alternative methods to city standards, such as impervious concrete. And so I don't want to run away too quickly from this notion of why do we have to do concrete, you know, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and constantly pave over our community. Even though we are a city, we're still a city in the foothills. And I think that we should stand up for alternative approaches to meeting some standards and providing bike lanes and whatnot that don't necessarily still have to look like a flatland urban kind of approach. I think that's very, very important. I really appreciate you bringing that up. This is one of those little tangents that, if the applicant will forgive us just for a second, that really kind of speaks to some of the broader context of things that we can accomplish here. So I'd like to thank you for that.
I would, if the conditions as written were approved, would the applicant in the future be precluded from using permeable asphalt in the sidewalk path? Concrete curb and gutter, but permeable asphalt as the sidewalk? Would the city's standards have to change through city council?
Well, that's kind of a hypothetical. I would think that those types of issues would need to be discussed by our city engineer, and perhaps, yes,
Because
council would need to weigh in on this.
I've read it that sidewalks must be troweled finished concrete.
Correct.
But do they have the option of going with asphalt? When they're going out to Goldbug, went out there to the Priest Mine, there's asphalt. It's just a simple, cheap asphalt sidewalk that's completely overgrown and useless, but it seems like a nice break between the big city and our rural, and it keeps it a little bit cheaper. So I don't know if city standards allow an asphalt sidewalk. You do need the curb and gutter for stormwater collection, but why can't the actual sidewalk be cheaper asphalt?
I would just say that that's a public facility and not something that's particular within the development. So the development itself could use pervious concrete and the like. They could propose that as long as it meets the minimum, you know, compaction and the strength and all of that. But since, you know, the sidewalk or curb and gutter, those are public facilities, and so they have to maintain a certain level of durability, a certain level of structural integrity that may not be possible with impervious concrete. But that's something for the engineers to discuss.
Could staff point to me in all these pages of conditions where I would look to find the landscaping plan coming back before a grading permit.
It does not state anything to that. It does not.
Doesn't it state it comes back before?
Before a building permit's issued, for construction of a building
Where's that
permit.
written in all these pages of conditions? This is kind of longer than the Cottonwood 4 and 6 conditions.
One moment. Perhaps I'll come back to that to answer if someone's got some more questions. I guess not.
I couldn't tell if it was just staff's recommendation or if it was actually a written condition. Maybe I don't have to spell it out in a given, just make it a new condition. Oh, we can get on with it. Okay.
No, since you asked, I'm going to respond. There is no condition that states that.
Where would be the appropriate location to install?
The appropriate location to do that would be under condition 3, where it talks about recording of a landscape maintenance agreement. So a sentence prior to that statement, I think would be appropriate.
Page number?
11.
Okay. After 3? Or part of 3?
You can make it part of 3.
Okay. We'll make a motion.
Landscape plan must come back before the Planning Commission, period, or something like that. The project applicant or his or her heirs shall record a landscape maintenance agreement prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy for the site. Alternatively, you could add a condition, but in terms of logical location, that would be the logical location for it.
Okay.
Alternatively, you could do 3A or 3B.
Okay.
So providing some options for you.
Yes, staff would recommend just a simple statement to the effect of a final landscaping plan shall be submitted subject to the review and approval of the Planning Commission prior to issuance of a grading permit. Done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's looking for.
Yes, the missing irrigation plan. Okay, I make a motion that we've held our public hearing. Make the following findings under Roman numeral 2, A, B, C, D, E, F. Under Roman numeral 3, make the findings as follows for site plan review 2014-01 under A, B, and C. Roman numeral 4, receive, adopt, and file the mitigated negative declaration. Roman numeral 5, conditionally approve CUP 2014-01 and site plan review 2014-01 with the following mitigated negative declaration measures on page 8, 9, 10, top of 11, with conditions of approval from the Planning Division 1 through 5 with an amendment to number 3 to add language, a landscape maintenance agreement and irrigation plan to return for Planning Commission review prior to the issuing of a grading permit. Continuing with condition Building Division number 6, Engineering Division 7, okay, everything under Engineering Division and attachments A, B, and C. That's your motion.
Second. There's been a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion?
I just want to make the observation that acknowledging that the applicant is going to appeal the requirement for the road condition, if that weren't the case, would be much greater concern for me with, I still have a lack of comfort with that position, but since it's going to be appealed, I can vote for the project.
Allison, would you conduct a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Chair Lowry,
Aye.
Vice Chair Drobish,
Aye.
Member Friend,
Yes.
Member List,
No.
Member Russell.
The motion carries. Of course, the results of this motion can be appealed to the City Council
10 days.
within 10 days.
Is there a fee on that appeal? And
Yeah, appeal fee, I
city
believe,
code
is
allows any planning
400.
commissioner or city councilor to appeal on behalf of an applicant for free? It's in the code.
I believe that
It's in the
there's
code.
language in the code, yes.
Find a friend.
No, the appeal that can be raised by a member of the planning commission.
Well, unless in the very, very likely event I'm mistaken, that moves us on to item 8. We're going to take a short break. Thank you all for your interest and input. The motion carried, and Charlie and Sean are going to proceed with their plan.
You're all writing
Roger that. Thank you.
approval. Except for this. Okay, good. Well, it's all down in case someone.
And we're back. Moving on to item 8. Andrew, will you speak to that, please?
I will. At the last meeting, I provided you with some paperwork handout regarding a potential workshop training. And I just noticed something in the agenda. There's actually our intern was supposed to provide input for this particular item, and of course that's not correct. That should be under item 9. So the last sentence that says Staff Development Services Department Intern Homestead should be under item 9. That being said, last meeting I did provide you with some material, and to refresh your memory, there are 5 components of this training. It's all in a webinar format, and it is from 2013. It's relatively current. It is affordable. It would be a group session, meaning all of you who are here, including our departed Mr. Russell, who left a little earlier this evening. I'm not advocating that all 5 of these segments be heard in one evening. The way I understand, and I've contacted APA, American Planning Association, and if we were to choose to do this, then the webinar we would get a license for up to 6 months to view these things. And what I envision, if there's interest by the body, to perhaps have a segment or 2, maybe as much as 2, at meetings where we're maybe a little light on a agenda. So what I'm requesting is some concurrence and perhaps unanimous consent whether this training is something that this body would want to entertain. It certainly is cost affordable for the city, and before I just go ahead and purchase it, I thought I'd raise it to your level as to whether or not this is of any interest to you. Would it help for me to go over some of the potential programs, or
what do they offer? What is it about?
Well, the overview is it's really set for Planning Commission and commission members. And one of the segments is an overview of the planning process. A second segment is titled Defensible Ethical Decision Making. A third is titled Conducting the Planning Commission's Meetings.
Is that California-based, since California is so different with Brown Act and such?
No, it is not California-based. It is, you have to understand, the American Planning Association is for the entire country, so it is not likely, I haven't previewed these things, it's not likely to address the Brown Act, no.
Okay.
Fourth segment, legal framework for the Planning Commission. And finally, current issues in planning for planning commissioners. All of these, again, are an hour and 15 minutes in length. And my understanding from the intro and the introduction to this by the APA is that they're being conducted by professionals, other planning commission members from other cities and jurisdictions, PhD, so you're talking about some professors who teach planning and provide this educational background and service to planning commissions. In fact, we have in the past have had that potential and possibility. But again, I said this earlier. It is cost effective because we are a member. The staff is a member of the APA, so we would get it at the reduced rate.
Has anyone here participated in that in the past and had a feeling one way or the other how beneficial it was?
Not this particular type of thing, no. This appears to be a webinar based on and part of the national conference that this organization puts on yearly. And so these were components that a planning commissioner who would have attended a American Planning Association national conference. Of course, there are a lot of different possibilities and seminars to hear during a conference, but these were set aside and focused for planning commissioners, and that's really the focus here.
Would we then, if we have a subscription for a while, then we have a light agenda, would we adjourn to a workshop and view it right here?
That's the way the city would intend it, yeah. And of course, the public could attend and
Sure.
watch it as well.
And there'd be no action, it's just an informational.
Information
thing.
and perhaps a light discussion about the topics that are being raised, but
And-
not specific to a city project or whatnot.
Would you have the ability, yeah, popcorn. Would you have the ability to pause it and have a discussion if something came up, or would we just?
That is a question that I believe could be done because, again, we would have the license for 6 months. I don't think you turn it on and you have to run the full hour and 15 minutes. But it's a good question. I would think that we would have the ability to pause it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm interested. It's in the city's budget.
Yes.
Okay,
I move we authorize staff to pursue the purchase.
second.
Great. Thank you.
Wait,
general
we don't have a
consent.
vote yet.
Aye.
No, hold on.
General
We haven't
consent?
voted yet.
Aye. Okay, let's just, an outcry vote, folks. Voice
Aye.
vote. Aye.
Aye. Andrew, is there any aspect of historical planning as part of that? Or is that something else that could also be done down the road? Because you went to a conference recently, right, for historical CEQA?
I did.
Interactions.
The city will certainly look for that. But these really are related to the function of a planning commissioner, what their role is, ethics. I mean, just looking through the description here. But no, I do not see anything particular related to historic, but there might be a subcomponent of something they're talking about, especially the legal framework, where they might touch on those types of things. But it's not called out necessarily in the.
Since given our historical city and so many projects that we review with historic nature, I would like to see a webinar information for us along those lines. And I think that the group that did the presentation, I'm drawing a blank on their name.
Yeah, we'll look for those when they come up. Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I would just point out that we do have a historical advisory committee, and we do look for certain courses and educational things for them to do. And so certainly if it's something where the commission can also participate, we'll look at that and let you know.
Okay, so I think we're on to item 9. Logistically, I'd suggest that we dim some of these lights that might tend to wash out the presentation.
You guys want lights on so you can take notes?
No, we have plenty of light here. We're plenty of light here. There we go, and then the other ones, I mean, these are camera lights. I think that, well,
I don't know where that light is.
well,
Maybe Jordan, do you know how to turn this?
okay.
Does it stay off? Got it, or does it stay off?
No, these should go off.
Good?
Okay? That's too much.
No, I did not. Thank you.
Yeah, I can see fine. All right. Well, I'm gonna just start with a quick announcement. So, in the packet, and in item 9 memo provided, there's some exhibits in the back, which are all out of order and don't match up anywhere in the memo or in the exhibit. So that was not well done, and that was all my fault. So I'm going to just clear that up for you guys really quick in case there's any confusion. So the first document attached to the memo for item 9 is development guide updates that we're going to discuss. The second one is the municipal gap analysis tool. That was what was given to the city, and that was referenced in the memo. The third set of documents are the fact sheets on lid design practices. And the fourth, at the very end, are the images that I think should accompany the updates that I wrote for the development guide. So hopefully that's not too confusing for you, and I'm really sorry that it's all messed up. Any questions about the exhibits in the back? Okay. Nope, I'm good. All right, so I'm gonna just, before we start with the slideshow, I'm just gonna go over the background on why these updates are in the development guide. So the updates are in response to the renewed Phase 2 small municipal separate stormwater sewer system, or the small MS4 general permit. This went into effect in July 2013. The City of Placerville is a permittee of the renewed small MS4 general permit and is therefore required to act upon several key changes that were made to the permit. As a part of Section E12, the Post-Construction Water Management Program, the City of Placerville is required to incorporate low-impact development, or LID, design standards for regulated projects, and 2, to conduct a review of existing guides of codes with priority on landscape design to discover gaps or impediments that would affect the implementation of design standards. So a review of the Placerville Municipal Code was conducted to assess the compatibility of the code with LID design standards. This was made possible through the Proposition 84 Stormwater Grant that was awarded to the California Stormwater Quality Association. The City of Placerville was provided the Municipal Landscape Gap Analysis tool, which you have in your packet. This was conducted by AHBL Incorporated for the Low Impact Development, or LID initiative for the Central Coast, which is a part of UC Davis. ABHL Incorporated, they evaluated the code, focusing primarily in the code related to landscape design, and they looked in the following 5 areas. These were vegetation conservation, open space management, rooftop runoff, open space cluster design requirements, and finally street and parking lot standards. So the LID design strategies are broken down into these 5 areas, and they were placed in there where they think they would be most utilized. The objectives within these 5 areas are, again, the LID design practices. Okay. Is there any questions about that? Nope. Okay, so we're going to start with yes?
Might have a question on, I'm kind of trying to understand, is this completely voluntary, or are these new requirements being put on throughout the city? Just looking at the end of staff report 1 and page 2, it says we're being required to incorporate design standards for regulated projects. I'm just wondering how much of this is voluntary and how much is now going to become law?
So what I think we do have, it is required so that we are compliant with our permit, that we put these standards into our development guide or code. However, if you look in the municipal gap analysis and the language or the recommendations they have, they want language to be put in either a code or a city document that allows for these as an option for regulated projects. So these have to, it is a requirement that these be put into a document, but these standards aren't required for every regulated project. Does that make sense? They're just supposed to be an option.
I guess I'm sharing Commissioner Dobish's confusion as to whether these are guidelines or requirements. Are we required to do the gap analysis? Is that a requirement?
That was a requirement.
Okay, it's required to do a gap analysis. How we address the gap analysis, the city has some flexibility with that as demonstrated by some of our responses to the gap analysis, right?
Yes, they did leave it kind of up to our discretion just by saying add language.
It's kind of like CEQA. You have to look at these things, but how you determine that you've mitigated or addressed it, there is some flexibility.
Yeah, so I'd just be concerned that there's no language of shall, must, in regards to this being added to the development guide. I'd like to see may and more of guidelines than a requirement. I mean, government just keeps growing and growing and growing, and I'm kind of concerned how this is just making the development guide even longer. And could it be a supplement to the development guide available to interested persons? Because this development guide, I don't know if it's increased 50% or what, but it just seems to be getting long.
So the approach I'd like to suggest that we allow Allison to complete her presentation and let us digest it as a whole thing and hope for understanding in the fullness of time. I certainly understand the concerns about expanding government. I'll say that the National Electrical Code, was expanded with the requirement for safety grounds. I would also say that given the new reality of water supplies, it's entirely likely that we'll go from encouragement to force of law on taking steps that recharge groundwater, for instance. So for my own part, regardless of my opinion of the advisability of these steps and how they're implemented, I'd like to know as kind of a unitary thing what it is that Allison would like to tell us tonight. So that's my suggestion.
One quick question before you go on. Page 2 at the top, it says regulated projects. Describe to me a regulated project versus a typical project.
I'm trying to determine how best to answer that question, but for the most part, because of the MS4 permit that the city is now required to comply with, it's quite extensive. This is just a very, very small piece of a lot of the different implementation tools the city is going to be attempting to incorporate into how it does business and how it regulates the development of lands within its jurisdictional boundaries. And so, for the most part, even a non-discretionary application may be subject to, MS4 requirements, such as these. And the requirements are just basically options to allow for the reduction of pollution and turbidity and stuff in surface waters. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but for the most part, all development except for the most minuscule development that maybe doesn't require a grading permit are going to be subject to these kinds of state regulations.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on to the presentation? No? Okay. Okay, so I would just like to introduce to you guys what it is they would like us to implement into our city documents. So just, have any of you heard of low impact development have any of you heard of low impact development or any of these design standards or practices? Okay. I think if we go over them, you might find that you're familiar with some of them. Okay, really a quick overview of what low impact development is and why it's been incorporated into the general permit and why it's important. It's a new approach to how we manage stormwater. So it's modeled after nature. It intends to use the natural processes that already take place that sometimes can't take place if you have impervious cover or take away that interaction. So all of these strategies intend to replicate that natural process or preserve natural processes where possible. So this can reduce flood risk, reduce impervious cover, and treat stormwater as a resource, not waste. And you'll find that many of these practices and the goals of LID actually align themselves pretty well with Placerville's existing guidelines. So that is to preserve and utilize natural vegetation that is native to the Placerville area, water conservation strategies, and reduce flood risk in the area. So it's just a way to use nature to provide benefits for us instead of recreating those by other means. So here are some of the design strategies that are offered to us to utilize in our document. So the state intended for these strategies and created them to be sustainable and more environmentally sensitive, but also economical and easily implemented into our existing guidelines. So all we need at this point to meet this requirement is just add the language that encourages these strategies as an option. What I'm going to go over with you right now is not an exhaustive list. These are just some new ideas and concepts that are going to be introduced. Many of the strategies that they talk about in LID we already attempt to do here in Placerville, including native vegetation conservation. All right, this is the first one. So what you're looking at are pictures of a bioswale and bioretention facility. So what a bioretention facility is, this is a landscaped area that filters and stores stormwater before it enters a drainage system. So essentially what happens is water from stormwater or water runoff from an impervious surface like a parking lot or sidewalk or street will be directed to one of these areas where it would enter a landscaped area, which would slow the velocity of the flow, and it would infiltrate the soil and the plants in the landscaped area, which then would work to remove pollutants that were picked up by the water on the impervious surface. The water then can enter the drainage system after it percolates through the mixture of soils and plants, and it'll have significantly less pollutants than if it had just entered the drainage system straight from the street.
Can I ask a question on that? So,
Yes.
So in this design, there,
Right.
you have there's like French drains or something underneath here that's capturing the water after it's kind of percolated through, and then that's eventually taken into the stormwater system. Is that how it's designed to work, as opposed to simply holding the water and allowing it to re-enter the water table itself?
There's several different options and it depends on what the particular need is for how you want to connect it to the drainage system. There are gardens, there are bioretention facilities called rain gardens that just hold the water, and then that will recharge the groundwater table. There also are ways, like you said, to take the water and put it back into a drainage system. So it depends on what the need is in the area. As you can see from the pictures, the water would be directed from a impervious surface into that landscaped area through like a break in the curb. That would allow water to reach the landscaped area. Like I said, that there's lots of options for bioretention facilities, including the rain garden, which I just described. Also, tree boxes can work as these type of mini bioretention facilities, capturing rainwater. And then the rainwater would work to irrigate the plants as well in the landscaped area. These work in a lot of different settings, including parking lots, where you already have a requirement to have so much landscaped area in the parking lot. These can work duly as stormwater management and providing shade and a landscaped element to the parking lot. This can also be implemented in streets and street medians, and also part of the sidewalk system. Then there also can be put into lawns and residential areas. The one that you see, I want to say the left, is a bioswale, and bioswale works similarly, except it works to convey water. So this would replace where you would have pipes or a drainage ditch. Instead, it would work. It's supposed to mimic a natural creek bed and move water that way and remove pollutants as it moves the water. So this using bioswales and bioretention facilities actually achieves a couple different goals. It improves water quality of the water when it actually reaches the drainage outlet, like Hangtown Creek. If we did implement these, the water quality would be much better once it actually reached Hangtown Creek. It also encourages the use of native plants and promotes water conservation strategies by naturally irrigating the water through rainwater, and also, like I said, the use of native plants, which are is the best strategy for intercepting the and removing pollutants. It also reduces flood risk by slowing down the velocity of the flow of the stormwater, which could pick up speed in a impervious setting. So the economic benefit of implementing bioswales and bioretention facilities, you get to, it's the money spent on storm drainage infrastructure would then not be needed. All right, next one. So this is rainwater harvesting. This is a way to utilize the rainwater that from your roof and actually use it for irrigation. So you can see the scale of which you can actually capture this water. You can use a rain barrel, or you can use cisterns or a set of cisterns. This picture, the cisterns, which is on the left, is actually from UC Davis that I took it. So this water that you can collect, it can be used for washing cars, irrigation during dry months, and landscape watering. And I believe that this is a pretty practical method to implement in residential, commercial, and industrial sites. It's also a good water conserving strategy. This is a picture of a vegetated roof. This is another way to intercept stormwater and prevent a lot of the pollutants from a roof to enter the drainage system. So essentially, you would just be watering the lawn on top of your, or the plants on top of your roof. This actually, they have found that vegetated roofs have a longer life than many of the conventional roofs systems. And this is porous pavement. So porous pavement is a alternative to conventional concrete and asphalt. You can use porous asphalt porous concrete, and there's different paver options as well. There's also soft paths, which is like gravel and dirt that you can use. These are intended for areas that are have low impact from traffic and to medium impact from traffic. Areas of high traffic aren't these types of roads wouldn't really be able to withstand that much impact, but this is an excellent option for areas like parking lot stalls and driveways. Also, maybe bike paths and pedestrian paths that are off the road would be a great way to reduce impervious cover in those areas. Essentially, water can now infiltrate the road, and actually it can work similarly to a bioretention system where it would remove pollutants through a series of soil and gravel and rock layers, and that can either recharge a groundwater table or enter into a drainage system.
And this speaks directly to what we had on our previous item, and even the broader concept of the whole sidewalk curb gutter issue, because what I'm hearing you say is this is a legitimate alternative to concrete for the sidewalk bike path portion. Is that right? That's
Yes, if it's in a low impact from traffic environment, then it should be able to withstand that type of traffic.
And I would assume a sidewalk is low impact, and this is certainly a lot more attractive than concrete, as well as the functionality in terms of the water concept, et cetera, et cetera. So.
There could be concerns with pavers like you see on the screen about the accessibility for all citizens. Porous concrete and porous asphalt have the same, would feel the same to all citizens as their conventional counterparts. So where pavers might not be always the most accessible option, porous concrete and porous asphalt can maybe be more accessible. All right, that is it for my slideshow.
So, I don't know if the chair is entertaining any comments.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Allison for putting this together for us. I hope we do more of this. This to me is of a piece with what Andrew has suggested for commission members to do, do some professional development education. And I see this is in that same vein. So this is, I'm happy to have the information presented. So thanks.
Yes, I'd like to echo that. And I'm an Aggie, and I get excited about different approaches to these things. I think the whole concept of pervious surfaces, parking lots and walkways, driveways, and all that, I think that's really good, particularly if we're thinking about how do we recharge the water table. The bioswales and the other facilities, those are also good, but eventually, excuse me, allergies, I think, they eventually simply send the water downstream through runoff, which frankly isn't necessarily a bad thing since the reservoirs are so low. We still want them to fill up. The rain barrel idea, having done this many, many times, the rain barrel thing is not near as practical as it looks, and here's why. First of all, in the times of the years when you can catch the rain, you don't need to use it. And if you don't use the water, it goes stagnant and gets algal, and then it also winds up becoming a breeding ground for mosquitoes and West Nile and all that sort of thing. It really is nowhere near as practical as it sounds. You would be much better off, frankly, to take your laundry water and empty that into your landscaping and allow that to get back into the water table. So that one, I don't warm up to, and again, that's from personal experience. But I do think, go ahead.
Can I comment on
Yeah.
your rain barrel? Over the last 2 years, I've had the opportunity to spend a number of weeks on the island of Dominica. And they use rain barrels almost on a regular basis. Every house has a rain barrel. Right. And they use it for drinking water.
But their rainy season is
And their
like
rainy
nonstop,
season
Rob.
is almost year-round.
Correct.
And that's the difference. And that's why we have to look at this in terms of the geographical area we live within. Right. That is, to me, the rain barrel's not practical for our location.
Right, yes,
A French-
that's my
A French
context as well.
drain, a house, downspouts connected to a French drain is a great idea to get water back into the ground versus a rain barrel.
So adopting the bioswale concept as part of your overall construction approach, yes, I totally agree with what.
Yeah, I would
Commissioner's saying.
also direct people's attention to the page where we see the bioretention in cross-section, and then below and to the left of that are the removal rates of contaminants.
Right.
So,
I saw that.
you know, I'm really impressed by the fact that by using bioretention, what you do return to the water table is drastically less burdened with toxics and pollutants once it percolates out of the bioretention facility. I'm reminded of the Los Angeles Basin flood control. The way they do flood control down there is they take rivers and they make concrete trenches out of them, the Los Angeles River being the most famous. And all of the storm drains pour into that, and it's a great way to make sure that every bit of hydrocarbon, heavy metal, pollutant that enters the system gets to the ocean. Exactly right. Exactly right. There's no, and I'm sure that's going to change in time, but yeah.
But that's a city standard, and that's where we're going.
Yeah.
Anyone know if the state is possibly moving towards taxing roof square footage or rain runoff like some states have? Because I could see us implementing a program of rain barrels and everything, and then they come along and tax us on it.
Yeah, I don't know.
A question on the porous pavement in roadways. How is it possible to meet PSI standards that the fire department would require?
Right, I think Allison made the point that those.
But a fire truck's got to go into every low-impact neighborhood, potentially.
So what the scenario you're describing is a piece of fire apparatus going down, say, some pavers or porous concrete or asphalt.
How does it meet the PSI standards?
Okay, and I think along with that, along with the PSI standards, how much traffic, how often, and what is the life expectancy? So my point is that one heavy truck going eastbound through I-20 through Dallas probably isn't a problem, but 20 years of them and you get wagon ruts. So all I'm asking you to do is consider leavening that analysis, you know, with the fact that that's not an element of regular traffic on a right-of-way like that.
But we do have set city standards, and does staff know, is it on a ADA pathway? Is it nothing more than a 1/4 inch deflection in material is the standard?
Well, it does, without getting into the standard per se, I mean, it does say that the porous pavement is a compromise between hardscape and stormwater management. It can withstand the weight and intensity of vehicle and foot traffic, while also allowing for aspects of the water cycle to take place. So I'm assuming from that might be incorrect, but I'm assuming from that it still meets the standard for vehicles. It's still construction grade.
I would just think the more that you come up to the standards of meeting the weight, like the recent parking lot we were approved, I think it was 40,000 PSI, right?
Wish I'd known about this.
And how do you obtain that strength, I think the more you obtain that strength, you reduce the porousness of it. Just seems logical that that would happen. Like decomposed granite, once you get a compacted decomposed granite pathway, it's porous, but it doesn't really.
It's
the
pretty
water sheds
impervious,
right
yeah,
across
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, what you're proposing. I mean, I can see going all the way down, from an impervious monolithic mass of, say, poured concrete down to something that almost becomes a friable material like DG. I think part of the analysis is 10% porosity better than 0%?
Yeah.
Allison, a question if I may. There wasn't specific, particularly with the porous pavements and sidewalk materials. I don't think there was really much information in terms of cost comparison. How much more cost effective is it to install these than it is standard asphalt or concrete? And the reason I'm asking is, I mean, the city could move towards requiring this approach, if it isn't substantial. So do we have any idea about what the cost differential is?
Okay, so I don't know any specifics, but from my research and understanding, the porous pavements alternatives probably are slightly more expensive, but the longevity of these options, if installed correctly, can outlive other roads.
Okay. I could see the possibility of water credits, like energy credits, for projects that use them.
I agree. And they also have, they withstand more easily freeze and thaw damage by allowing the water to fall through. And then there's also less of a health safety risk.
And by design, they would have expansion and contraction properties, I would think, just by design.
Yeah.
I've seen up in Washington State where they have they don't have a water problem. These retention ponds, and they're everywhere. And I think they would work. The question I have is, how do you keep them from becoming mosquito breeding grounds?
Yeah, that's an issue.
The important thing is to make sure that the actual drain isn't being clogged, and that you have to make sure that the water is not staying in the area for more than 48 hours.
Okay.
Once it starts staying as a pond instead of just a drain, then you have issues with mosquitoes and other unwanted things. So,
What would be your opinion that a bioswale or a retention area would become a wetland? And we all know what impacts that would become from the feds, because a wetland triggers all kinds
I don't
of
want to turn it into a
regulations that would halt you from developing your property or your neighbor from developing their property. Just have to consider.
So are you sure that those wetland rules for naturally occurring wetlands are the same as for
There's been
man-made
been
wetlands?
cases where somebody has created a pond, it has been declared a wetland, a man-made wetland, and then it triggered where they couldn't build on the property.
Yeah, I've heard
So
that
just be
too.
careful about that. I do like the idea of reducing the flood risk, because I pay flood insurance and it just is out of control. And if we can reduce the cost on that, so that then could be incorporated into the Hangtown Creek master plan. I'm not sure if it addresses flooding, but if something through the city created a lower flood risk, it would help those of us that have to pay. The vegetated roofs just seem to me in this climate would cost more in money and water than the benefits that they would provide. They're there to sequester bad air, right? But look where we live.
yeah. I didn't find a place in the development guide at this point to incorporate vegetated roofs. I had a potential spot, but I didn't have there's no language right now that I have put in about vegetated roofs. It's just something, a practice that they are suggesting for us. So if you can find a place for vegetated roofs as an option. It is being used in Davis, which has, I mean, I don't know how different the air quality is between Davis and Placerville is. Davis is in the valley, but it is being used, I think, as a cost-effective solution.
Well,
It is dry
we are
there.
non-attainment county, right? Or at least the West Slope is. I don't know if we'd get some kind of credit for incorporating something like that. Just there's a lot of added extra costs, engineering for the structural to withhold it. And then I think once you create it, we basically get 3 months of rain.
Yeah.
And then the roofs cook. So you're just gonna have to be watering and watering and watering this vegetated roof, seems to me.
I don't know exactly where we are in the presentation, but I did want to go to page 25 of the development guide. This is Roman numeral 5, site-specific improvements. On page 25, we're talking about item number 3, sidewalks and pedestrian circulation. And there's new language, item E, new language has been added, suggested. Where appropriate, use multiple-use saw paths made out of materials such as decomposed granite, bark, or compacted rock to create a more environmentally sensitive area. And I think this is exactly along the lines of what Commissioner List was suggesting, and I completely support. Now, I'm not sure about bark, you know, as a sidewalk material, but and you can look at that, but I think adding, in light of this discussion and presentation, but adding the pervious materials or consideration for that would certainly be appropriate here. And I'd really like to begin encouraging that if this becomes, you know, part of the guideline. I think we should really begin to encourage that. I think we really need to kind of look at this in the context, Pierre, because now a lot of places we have concrete, right? Concrete, sidewalk, curb, and gutter, and it's concrete. Now all of a sudden we're going to start going to these alternative materials, which I think is great, but how's that going to mesh and how's that going to fit? Frankly, I'd like to see that wherever possible. Maybe not on Main Street, but certainly in a lot of the other developments as an alternative to the standard concrete. So I think E needs to be looked at very carefully in terms of what we really want to say here and how we want to do it and what flexibility we want to allow. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'm not sure E that was added is related to perhaps a path of travel that we're trying to get someone who's disabled from point A to point B. Perhaps the materials that are called out here would not be appropriate for that type of path because of the difficulty of someone in that incapacitated fashion to maneuver or get through that. I think that what this language is really addressing is perhaps again not a path of travel example, but just a way, like I know the city of Chico where I went to college, speaking of our arch rival Davis, but the city of Chico in their parks, they often, I think every couple of years, they put down shavings, bark, for lack of a better word, in their paths. And these paths are not, again, nature paths. These are not path of travel, and they're not even called out as being disabled access. They are just what they are. They are historically been a walking path or a nature path. And I think that's really the context here. It's not meant to be a required path of travel per the building code from the building to perhaps a parked car or a bus stop or things of that nature. So I think I just wanted to clarify.
Well, then if that's true, then I think we need a separate section, because this is under sidewalks and pedestrian circulation. Then we need a separate F. We need an F that talks about use of pervious materials. And it'd probably be maybe some language that makes a clear distinction between what we're talking about, because I think E then starts to get into a special circumstance. It does say where appropriate, I see that, but, you know, and actually maybe put the pervious F up above this one and have this one as the very last one as it is now. So just to point that out.
I want to mention two things. Number one, it says where appropriate. And I think
Correct.
that's very important because we're also in an age of ADA.
Yes, quite.
And none of these meet the requirements for ADA. So you got to balance the two.
No, right.
And in traveling the little bit I have in Europe, a lot of their walkways are cobblestone. You know, a little tough to get around if you're in a wheelchair, but water goes right through it. You know, and I think with some creativity we could have the same thing here. The paver, the idea, the independent restaurant down the street. You go in the parking lots, I think it's on both sides, and I don't know when that came to the commission, but both of those are pavers. And you walk across that in the wintertime like I have in rain, and you don't run into puddles.
Yes.
And it is not sagging because the base material underneath it was done properly. And it makes a big difference on those kinds of parking lots.
And just getting into, if a property applicant came for a conditional use permit and we required a bioswale for drainage along their frontage, would that then become a setback, an encroachment, a non-buildable area? Would it increase the setback that exists now if a property has a 20-foot setback in their front yard and then we require a 3-foot bioswale? Now, does that push potential building site further back?
No.
Okay.
Typically, the way an engineer would evaluate a new development project is that the project's going to create impervious surface. And in our code, we require that the project address this new impervious surface, and that drainage needs to go somewhere. And they're obligated to mitigate that increased pervious surface and the runoff created by it. Basically, it's a net zero, meaning
Mitigation.
So right, the requirement of the engineer is to come up with a concept to address that issue. This body, I can think back recently to the project on Washington Street where Marshall Hospital received authority from you, or recommendation and city council approval for their satellite parking lot, and that included a detention system where that was their approach to address that. I think that's really what we would require. It's a quiver that they could pull from, or the other analogy is a paint palette and a color they could pick to address that issue. If they decided to do a drainage detention basin, fine. If that mitigates the issue, then maybe yes, the design of their building may need to reflect that. Maybe in other contexts, like this parking lot example I mentioned, maybe a below the surface facility or system is warrants because of maybe the compact space for the site. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, if an applicant engineer, if they wanted to do a on-site detention basin, that could take up part of that property. And it could involve moving the building or buildings or other improvements on the site to address that issue.
The Boys and Girls Club had a detention section out
Correct,
back.
yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Good
And I was just wondering, it looked like it passed underneath the bus loop in the
Right.
back.
That
So
was
it must
how they
meet
addressed it, yes.
crush standards. So Allison, did you have any input on their proposed detention, water detention, or runoff detention? I'm looking for the page of it. Appeared to me it was just underground trenches, underground culverts or something.
Yeah, if I recall, it's out in here and possibly
Yep. Kind of looked like a giant septic system.
where the outfall structure would be somewhere out. It's not shown here, but it might be right there.
So that is capturing their roof runoff and slowly letting it percolate back into the groundwater system.
Whenever the city staff looks at these development proposals, we require a pre to post analysis of the drainage. And so their project cannot increase the amount of runoff from the site that would be pre-development. So, in a nutshell. And then to answer your other question too about a setback, if a proposal is proposing bioswales or retention ponds or those kinds of things, it doesn't automatically require a setback as it would from a natural water body.
Okay.
If that's what you were referring to.
Yeah, I was just concerned that it would become another, like a sidewalk then is a requirement, and there's setbacks. I guess setbacks right now are just off the property lines. And I was just concerned that creating one of these systems would then start to shrink the property, the buildable property left to the property owner.
Yeah, a lot of times it depends upon, as Andrew pointed out, the actual person that's designing the facility. There are a lot of really good examples along Green Valley Road and a lot of larger developments in Sacramento where a lot of these bioswales have been implemented. You can, like I say, you can drive down a lot of the newer shopping centers along Greenback Lane, and they have the bioswales there. That's all alongside the parking lot where the water is then collected and conveyed to these bioswales where they collect, and then they're slowly disseminated into the drainage system before entering some larger surface stream or river or something of that nature. And in Tahoe has some of the more elaborate water collection systems. Of course, they're trying to maintain the integrity of the lake and its clarity. And so, if you've been to Tahoe recently, you can see a lot of the bioswales and impoundments that have been created to capture all the water runoff from the parking lots or other impervious surfaces, and so that all the turbidity and a lot of the particulates and stuff in the water slowly goes into the soil, and so it doesn't enter Lake Tahoe. But that's where you can see a lot of examples of where this has been pushed to the limit as far as trying to reach that goal.
On page 32 of the proposed guideline, item 10, 10A, 10 is underlined, A is not. Those are both new language, correct? Because those are both new language?
Yes, they are.
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry
A would
about
have
that.
to be underlined. But I'm a little bit concerned about almost requiring rain gardens. Language such as, instead of, I like language that says consider, but it says where possible, incorporate. That tells me that if it's possible to do it, then you need to do that. And it's under landscape design guidelines too. And because it talks about requiring curb cuts to divert stormwater directly to the facility. So I'm not sure this is the correct place for this. Maybe it is, just in my quick read of it, but I think it needs to be more permissive than required language. Should be more recommended than required.
If you can look at, if I remember correctly, when writing this language, I tried to respond as best I could to the opportunity to improve in the gap analysis tool. So I think this had to do with street standards. Sorry.
I think it's also in that section because of the, if I can interject, I think it's also in that section of the landscape section because of the component that we require landscaping around parking lots. And so this is an opportunity to provide perhaps a rain garden effect or a rain garden function incorporated into and adjacent to a parking lot, which of course has impervious surface on it, and unless they use the impervious or pervious pavers, for lack of a better word.
All right.
Sorry, Allison, I interject.
No, it's okay. I'm still trying to find the.
I could see a parking lot landscape divider, the little trim. Right now, it's typical to see a raised planter bed. Instead, it'd be sunken, a bioswale, and all the rainwater would go in there and perk back into the water table. How many native species of grass do we have in Placerville?
Allison has a fact sheet that one of them has a photo of a cul-de-sac with, and I think that's part of your fact sheet, where there's a cul-de-sac, which of course has an expanse of impervious surface, and incorporated in that was a slight depression where water would collect, and that could become a vegetative amenity, for lack of a better word, because of the potential of having that water there during runoff periods. Was I mistaken? I think there is a fact sheet.
I mean, it's if you're talking about the cul-de-sac, that's actually in the picture at the very end, the
Yeah, I
visual
saw that.
additions. Yeah, that was taken, I want to say, it was taken here in Placerville on, I want to say Oak Street or Oak Street Drive. Anyway, it's a road off of Cumbellic that has a cul-de-sac where they did this. Is it Oak Terrace? Anyway, it's off of Cumbellic, and so that's where they did this. And
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know where we're at in the presentation.
Well, the presentation was completed
Okay.
40 minutes ago.
But I mean, in terms of going through the development guide, like we've done in the past, we need to do anything, how much more we need to do.
Well, this is a discussion. We're not here tonight to make substantial changes to this document. I think it's a great idea to raise these issues.
okay.
But we don't have a requirement to leave here with a work product of the.
No, I'm just wondering if we can move it along.
Very
Yeah, okay.
Okay, go ahead, John.
In reading this document, on page 32, letter C, Main Street Historical Area, it came to mind as I was reading through this that in a number of the towns that I visited, they have what they call parking pockets. Parking pocket is where you have, in place of a car parked, you have the sidewalk bends out and it's landscaped. You know, I'd love to see that in downtown, where right now you drive through Main Street in downtown, and there's very little vegetation other than some hanging baskets, which are beautiful, and I love those. But to be able to take out some of those parking places, and I can hear the merchants downtown screaming.
I want to be
The
there when you attend that PDA meeting.
The other thing that I saw these used for in front of restaurants, that they bumped their restaurant so they had outdoor dining in front of those, in those areas. And to me, it slowed traffic down, not because it was something out in the road, but it just, the effect of the vegetation in those pockets between the cars really made a difference, and for what it's worth.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I agree, John, with that observation, and I think if you go to like Town Center in El Dorado Hills, you see the possibilities where you can master plan a development to accommodate those amenities. One of the things we struggle with here, of course, is this is a 150-year-old plus town, and which was once paved in dirt. I'd like to again thank Allison for her input and her willingness to field these questions from us. I'd like, without objection, to move on to item 10, matters from commissioners and staff.
Staff just has one item to bring to your attention, which would be we are going to have a meeting in 2 weeks, and that item will be the teen center request, conditional use permit, 669 B Street. So some members may remember that the applicant came before you for a request for an interpretation of the zoning. So that'll be a conditional use permit public hearing, and I will be away out of the office for 10 days or so, but I hope to perhaps get that workshop webinar purchased so we can have that at least maybe one of the first segments as a potential item for the 16th. At this point, that's all I know what's coming forward. In terms of future items, at this point, I can't crystal ball those at the moment.
I have an announcement.
Okay.
Anyone travel down Center Street or the alley today? Whole lot of scaffolding came down around Hangman's Tree and
outstanding.
Herrick Building.
Outstanding.
2 sides, and they'll be back in the morning at 7 a.m. to take down the front. So,
That's great.
completely different look.
Wow. Are there any other matters? We stand adjourned.